if I want to sit down with you and talk for an hour, we're going to talk about God, then your record should talk about God. If we're going to sit for an hour and talk and that's not going to come up, then you probably don't need to put that on your record.
That songwriting is an art is widely understood as a truth. What can be messy or confusing is what becomes of any art, particularly songwriting, when it becomes a job, or a business, or an industry. And then, what becomes of the people who identify as professional artists when the season changes and the industry evolves? Part of what makes Andrew Osenga a standout artist, aside from his clear capability as a songwriter, is the posture he lives in towards the making of music, towards the people who make music, and towards the business of making music. He is an artist through and through. I enjoyed my conversation with him, and I expect you will as well. Check it out. So, hi. Thanks for making some space and time. Appreciate it.
Oh, I love it. I'm so excited.
Well, good.
I don't know what you want to talk about, but I always love talking to you, so it'll be great.
Well, good. No, that's my job. My job is to determine. You do podcasts, son. You know how this goes.
I know.
I steer the ship. You just hold on and hope to stay on board.
Sounds great.
That's how this goes. You are talking to me from your house in Nashville.
I'm from my studio in Nashville.
You're in your studio in Nashville. Now,
yes.
You've been in Nashville now for a long time.
I have 20 some years.
This
22?
is right, which is right about it's almost that midway point. That's about half your life.
It's over half my life. I've been here longer than anywhere else. Yeah.
And you came from where? Remind me where you came from.
I'm from a small town called Normal, Illinois.
Hence the name of your original band, etc. You've been in Nashville long enough. Does it feel like home? Does Normal feel like home? Do you have kind of a split sense of I'm from, but I live in? Tell me.
No, I mean Nashville is home. I mean, we like to say, my wife and I, that we're not natives, but we're locals.
Got it. And there's another band name there, by the way, the Local Natives. Pretty
yeah,
sure. We're just all over.
Even harder to trademark.
No, that's actually a band name. There really is a band name.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
The Local Natives. It's really true.
Yeah. Yes.
Nashville feels like home, and you moved there for music.
Yeah, indirectly. I was actually going to teach high school. Well, I was going to college because I wanted to teach high school English.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't made a lot of plans, and then I broke up with a girl, and then there were less plans, and I had a friend who said, there's a college in Nashville, and I said, sure. And I had a songwriting deal that I got my senior year of high school, which sounds cooler than it is. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, I'll write songs to pay for college, and then I'll go teach English. And then kind of quickly music sidetracked that plan, which was a very unthought out plan, but
the original plan was unthought out.
Yeah. Well, every plan has been unthought out.
Are you, because you're not really a planner, or do you, because you come up, you seem more like you do have plans. You're not an unorganized kind of randomized person.
I have learned, it took me probably 10 years to realize that strategy and business thought and just being a wise, thoughtful person actually allows you to be the creative person that you want to be. I used to, for some reason, when I was starting out, I thought those were in opposition to each other. It turns out one feeds the other if you do it right.
Yeah.
So now that's kind of what I do.
You plan.
Is help artists more. I make my own art, but most of my time is spent helping other artists learn how to do what they do better and build a system and kind of create a thing so that when they make their art and they share their heart or whatever, it goes into a form and a system that actually can bear fruit.
Say more about that, because what I know of you, what a lot of folks know of you, is Andrew Osenga, songwriter, guitar player. And now and we'll get back to, like, you also run and host a podcast.
Yeah.
There's this other element to your life, though, that is kind of this passing on of your knowledge, artistically, creatively, professionally, to artists. What is that, and in what context does that take place?
Yeah, man. Well, so I am the director of A&R, which stands for Artists and Repertoire, Artists and Their Songs, at a record company called Integrity Music. Currently, I was at Capitol Records before this. And I've done this for kind of on and off the last 5 years, the last 4 or 5 years, I guess, when I toured for the first 16 years of my life or of my career. And
as opposed to
oh my God,
from
like
birth to my sophomore year, I was on the road. It's all I knew.
Yeah,
it's like a different version of the book The Road, but
that was the story of our band's keyboard player, whose parents were Southern gospel artists.
Is that real?
Was on the road. Case in point, I was on the road from literally 3 months old till he was 16, and said, "Can I stay home?" But yeah, so I toured for all my adult life, and it got to a point where I was like, okay, I can make a living on the road, playing guitar, but then I don't see my kids, my wife, and I feel like I'm a failure as a father, or I'm home and I can't figure out how to make a living, and then I feel like I'm not providing for my wife and my daughter. So either way, it was like, this is not sustainable. And around that time, an opportunity at Capitol opened up to do A&R, and I'd always kind of wondered about that. So a guy like me who's produced a bunch of records and played guitar for different people and been an artist and been a part of bands, and I've just kind of done a little bit of everything. Not necessarily have I done anything super well. I've just done a lot of everything.
Right.
And so the idea is that in this role, being able to kind of do a little bit of everything is what's needed. So I look for artists that a company can invest in, and that we can help them just partner together and help them create their songs, their records, and then, market them and distribute them and all that. And I am the person who kind of oversees the actual song craft and the artistry of that. So when I'm in the building, in my office, I am interfacing with the label on kind of representing the artist, because they're out on the road or they're in the studio, and I'm the person in a meeting that can say, this is what the song's about. This is the heart of a project, whatever. When I'm with the artist, it's, hey, we talked about this. We talked about the scripture. We talked about your father. We talked about this. When I hear the song, I'm not seeing a connection here in this verse. So how can we tweak this verse? Or is this the right production? Is this the right, is it the right tempo? Is it the right key? Are you saying the things that you really are wanting to be saying? Is this the thing you want to fight for? And so I get to kind of help them shape that. And that's my favorite part.
And those are the kind of questions you would ask of yourself as a songwriter.
They are. It's most of the questions. Those are the kind of questions my whole community asks of each other.
Some years move and grow with all the rain they need. But when every door is closed and I've lost everything.
Say more about that, because when you sort of turning the table on and saying, you'd worked as a songwriter in a band, you've done some solo work, you've been in a couple different bands, and when you're talking about songwriting, the way you're describing right now, you're working with someone else in an A&R context, and you're asking questions that would be asked among a group of people as opposed to just internally. Yeah.
So there's a group of friends here that I've just, we've been in a community for honestly like 15 years, probably, a lot of us. Guys like Andrew Peterson, Ben Shive, Randall Goodgame, Andy Gullahorn, sort of my dear friends who are all singer-songwriters.
Right.
And sometimes there are seasons of life where we work together a lot. There are seasons where we don't work together as much, but we're just, when we get together, what we do is we play each other our songs and we tear them to pieces so we can build them back together. It's just kind of what we've always done. we joke that our wives get together and watch football, and we sit together, guys get together and like read poetry and cry.
That might not be entirely untrue.
It's not untrue at all. It's 100% true.
That's really good.
So all that to say, I've been shaped a lot by people who are better songwriters saying, hey, we've talked about this. When you played me this song, I felt like I got 80% of what you wanted to say, because I know what you want to say, because I know you. And that's really helped me become a better writer.
Yeah. And
hopefully that, we've all done that for each other. And so in this role, I do a lot of that, where I'm not typically, most of the time, I'm not actually writing with young band. It's like they're bringing me a batch of songs and I'm going through and going, okay.
Yes.
This is working. This one's not. But it's a lot of, it's young life. It's a lot of just time at coffee shops and walking around the lake and going, so what do you want to say? Why? Why do you want to say that? Well, what shaped you to want to say that? What is it about your childhood, about your, about your family, about your community that drives you to want to make this point to strangers on the internet,
So when you started writing music, as an infant, apparently, before you hit the road, before you hit the road between 0 and 16, when you started, I'm not letting that go. That's a good moment. When you started writing music, maybe I should ask this instead of assume, but like was it personal? Was it like it's Andy in a room thinking about life and God and girls and war and like trying to figure out how to work that out? Is that how it started?
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
That's hasn't really changed. Me in a room, life and God and girls. That's pretty much it.
Yes. Different sort of context for the girls thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then
wife and 3 daughters. Yeah.
But then as time went on, you're writing with a band, you're doing it for money. And now the songwriting context takes place where you're working through someone else's songs in a way, whether it's among friends or whether it's in the A&R context, you're working with songs in a way that has to be a little bit, maybe, I don't know, like less personal, that like it's not good just because it's yours kind of a thing. Can you talk about that evolution over time?
Yeah.
Was it easy for you to move from like, hey, this is a song of mine that I care about, it feels good, and I needed to say this way, to like, here's a song that I need to work for other people, and I'm willing to let someone like slit its throat and breathe new life into it, and like, there's a bit of a progression there to some degree as an artist. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's when I first started writing, it was very personal, and honestly, all writing is personal. There's no way for it not to be, but you learn, the idea is, whose story am I telling? And kind of initially in my first band, when I would first start writing with other people, which was not a thing I did a lot when I started, I could only write about myself and my own experience. And eventually, I think a big turning point for me was I had joined this band named Caedmon's Call, which was kind of a big folk pop band in the late 90s, early 2000s. And we went to India, and we spent a month or two in India kind of walking around, meeting with different people, hearing different people's stories, recording lots of indigenous instruments, and trying to take that music and those people's stories and turn them into a record that would share that experience with our American audience. And through that, I started for the first time writing stories about people who weren't me intentionally, and trying to write for an audience that wasn't me or my friends, and stories that weren't my own. And that, whether or not I did it well on that record, that was a turning point in going, oh, okay, I don't have to bleed on every song for it to be useful or good. And so now,
you're sort of drawing a line then between what's personal and what is like deeply emotive.
Yeah. And what I learned is I kind of have to always be making my own music for me to be good with anyone else's. So as long as I've got some shows or a record I'm in the middle of where I'm telling my own stories, even if no one's listening,
right?
that I'm kind of working that stuff out. I'm chasing whatever kind of rabbit trails I want to chase. Then I'm free to say, okay, so these skills I've developed doing that, I can use to help you tell your story. And that was a big shift. So, earlier This week I was writing with a friend who's writing songs for his record. He needs songs fast. So he's inviting some friends, we're going over and trying to help him come up with ideas and finish songs so that he can get this record done in time. And it's like, all right, what does he want to say? So I'm asking him questions, what he wants to say, what he wants it to sound like. And, you pour a little of your own experience into that, but it's about trying to catch as much as sort of the rain of his words that falls and go, okay, I've rearranged it for you. How's this?
Yeah.
How's this? And so it's just a different way of using the same set of tools.
Scatter my ashes in beautiful places. Offer the blue skies the glory of your faces. You are a part of this kingdom and creation. Scatter my ashes in beautiful places.
Does it mean the same now? Like, do you still have a sense of like personal meaning that like music, songwriting is it predominantly meaningful, or do you find moments of meaning and it's mostly professional and this is my job and I find moments of meaning? Are you driven by meaning still? Like, is there a relationship there? Kind of a tension?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, like, it's been my entire adult life. I don't know the difference between, I have never been able to draw a distinction between what I'm doing for my income and what I'm doing for meaning most of the time. Wow.
Right. That's a pretty fantastic thing to have to be able to say.
Well, it doesn't mean that I'm always checking either of those boxes. Often I'm checking neither, but I'm always kind of in pursuit. And I have had a sort of we live frugally, which helps, but also like there have been a number of seasons of life where I've been able to check both boxes. Like, okay, I'm getting something out of this. And I'm making enough money that we can live. Like, okay, good. Yeah. Good. And like the meaning that I get has changed. Like I used to be very much about, I've got to say this burning passion in my heart. Now I'm kind of like, dude, get over yourself. But what I've realized I love more than anything in the last few years is I love helping people figure out what their story is so they can tell it. I love helping people tell their stories the best way possible, particularly when it's the story of how God and redemption has intersected with their life, and that to me is endlessly fascinating. So, interviewing somebody on a podcast, producing somebody's record, standing in the back of a room while a crowd sings along with a song that they don't know I had anything to do with, like those all scratch the same itch.
One of the things one of the features in songs of yours, off and on, is you'll reference the I don't necessarily call it the difficulty, but you'll reference kind of it's the way played out now, but you'll reference kind of the struggle of being an artist and making music. And lines about like, hey, we got a record contract, and you know how that went. Like you'll come around in your songwriting off and on to this cycle or story of I don't know. I'm staying away from words like failure per se, but you come back to the struggle pretty often in songwriting. Is that a matter? Is that just a matter of personal processing, or are you intentional about like your audience knowing a little bit about what they're coming into? Like, tell me about that, because I hear it off and on, like I said, in your songs. Is that just like, this is in me to say, or are you trying to put something across to an audience so that they would understand your context, or what is that?
Yeah, well, I think to some extent, I should say this, like, any solo record I've ever made, I'm always the only writer on it. Essentially, I'm like, hey, here's my diary. 12 people might enjoy this. They might get something out of it, and that's fine. Like, I've never really made any of those records for anyone else. I spend most of my time making records, trying to make them more and more trying to make them so that the most people can get it. My records are the exact opposite. So, but I think one of the things that I have just struggled with as a human is knowing how to separate my identity from the relative successes or failures of my business life.
Yeah.
You know, I drive, you know, the houses I drive by that are way bigger than mine. And, you know, it's like, those are things that I struggle with. You know, I really wrestle with who am I in that context. And so, I don't know. I just feel like I'm interested in having those discussions that I don't hear a lot in songs.
Right. Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people might be like, yeah, I don't really care about that. But that's fine.
Yeah.
The song's not for you. My feelings aren't hurt.
Right.
If you're somebody that goes, man, I'm glad to know I'm not the only person that thinks that way or that has had that struggle, you know, to just, sometimes you got to call it out and, you know, like, what's the Bruce Coburn line? It's something that you got to drag those lies kicking and screaming into the light.
Absolutely.
And then you see what they are, you know, and it's just, a lot of that is just me trying to do that.
Why do you worry, my dear friend? I know you're hurting with no end. I feel your anger, recognize it like my face in a pool. Worry is killing us, it robs us of today. It won't change anything or take the pain away. We hide in busyness and hear ourselves say that we trust the hand of God.
I mean, you talk about storytelling and you talk about your and meaning. You know, you're talking about like whose story. I want to hang on this line for a little bit. Like, you know, whose story am I telling? A lot of the work that you have done, whether with the Normals, to some degree, your solo work, although maybe that's where it gets a little more interesting, but definitely with Caven's Call, has fallen in line or fallen in the context culturally of what oftentimes is identified as the Christian marketplace.
Sure.
And obviously, you know, we're going to have that conversation. And I still don't think it's played out yet because I still don't think we know all of what we're talking about when we say it. But but when you talk about meaning and expression, you've been in and around what we call the Christian marketplace for a long time. Have you felt then constricted at all by that? Like, if you're writing from a place of human meaning, your own human meaning, your own story, but there's this particular marketplace, particular place and context in which that does take place. Have you felt a place there? Have you felt constricted there? Can you talk about your historical relationship with the particular Christian marketplace?
Yes. Yes. Gosh, how much time do you have? To call it a complicated relationship would be generous. I got into Christian music. I ended up getting signed by a Christian publishing company, then a Christian record company when I was 18 years old. Sort of in the faith, the version of sort of Christianity that I had grown up with. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know there was an option to not do Christian music if you were going to be a musician. And so,
just because of your upbringing and your geography? Yeah.
I mean, like, I listened to Pearl Jam and I loved Pearl Jam, but I didn't know that you were allowed to be in Pearl Jam.
Oh, like culturally, you didn't, like, you could listen, but you couldn't really participate.
No, I could listen, meaning I had to, you know, sneak that in. I was raised very fundamentalist, and so I should say by really, really good people who I think sat under some very wrong teaching.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So I don't want to throw the people under the bus because I really learned a lot from people who really cared about me the best that they knew how.
Right.
But what they were taught, I think, was often wrong. And I'm sure, by the way, that what I'm teaching my kids is probably wrong in ways I don't understand. So,
amen and amen. That's good wisdom.
To be very clear about that. All that to say, I got into Christian music because I didn't know you were allowed to do anything else, and but I was never super comfortable with it. and kind of
from the
I think
outset,
was never
from early on. You were like, I don't know if I feel this all the way.
Day one. And that was but there was this whole kind of undercurrent of people who were, college age, who'd been signed to these labels and were on the Christian tours, playing the Christian, whatever events, and would just sit around and complain because how stupid it was. It was very cynical. And eventually I got to a point where I think I just became, I had a friend actually who sat me down and was just like, and I don't know what your podcast rating was, but he sat me down. He said, hey, I need you to know that you're an a-hole. Like, you're just, you're not a good person. And he said that out of love. And that was actually really shocking to me. And he's like, hey, there's some people I think you need to forgive. Have you ever thought of forgiving them? And I had not. And it was this kind of revelatory conversation that I probably text this friend 2 or 3 times a year and say, hey, thanks for calling me names.
From that one conversation.
That one conversation that was, somebody cared about me enough to say, I'll risk losing your friendship to tell you a truth that no one else is willing to tell you about yourself, because you've gotten so cynical. And so that began the journey of kind of undoing that cynicism.
How long ago was that?
That was probably, 15 years ago, 16 years ago now.
Yeah, because that takes some unpacking.
Yeah. I call myself a recovering cynic. Like, it's always there, but I try to be active in not indulging it.
Yeah.
And the way you do that, by the way, is gratitude. And so while I say, like, I've been in the Christian music industry for a long time, and I've been in some places, like, for seasons, I've been in the kind of high ranking spots in that industry.
Yeah.
And you realize, like, well, I wouldn't listen to 98% of the music that this building makes that I work
artistically.
for. Artistically, as a fan, like, this is not for me. I'm not their demographic. Okay, well, there is music that I love. People are making music that I think is great. So I'm going to listen to that. Now, I've got this person in my office right now. How can I help them make this thing the best it can be? Even if it's not for me. And I couldn't have done that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Well,
there's a kind of
think about it now. I hope to be good at it in 10 years. But
yeah.
But yeah, that's been the big shift.
It takes what you're describing. I mean, it takes that the sort of professional. I don't know exactly how I want to frame this, but it takes a kind of detachment, like a mythos that you have to remove from the process, in order to do that to songs of that nature. I'll do it this way. This is the story. So. As the story goes, I was at a songwriting conference, not too far from where I live, and it was pitched as a Christian songwriting conference, which anytime, and you and I both know, like, anytime something gets framed that way, there's kind of this, like, oh shit, this is going to get weird moment.
Yeah.
So one of the things one of the practices during the conference was, if you were an attendee, you had the option of sending in like a few songs, song or two, and every teacher or panelist person had the option of like taking a few on. And so I took a few on, and it was like, I had like a batch of 10 songs, and like you get to listen to the song, and then you write up a critique on a critique sheet. And then artists, the attendees would then get their songs back before they came to the conference. And you could talk to whoever the person was. Here's the phone number, not phone number. Here's the email address. Here's blah, blah, blah. You can, write this person back, which is how that was supposed to take place. Like if you had questions about your critique, you could do that. Well, this particular person had gotten a critique, not by me, but by one of the other panelists and the other teachers at the songwriting conference, who was a much bigger name, just much more successful, like really recognizable name and face in like church music culture, specifically church music culture. And this person, I guess, had gotten a critique from this panelist that he did not like or agree with, and you knew that because when this big named artist person got up on stage and started doing his thing, he went to a Q&A, and the guy whose song had been critiqued stood up and said, "I have a question about my critique." Like, oh gosh, here we go.
That's amazing. And
dude on stage says, well, okay, sure. What's your question? He says, "I don't understand why, like I wrote in the message to you, like this is a song God gave me. And if God gave me the song, like how, who are you to critique it?" And this sort of like weird, I'll pause for a second. It's sort of like the weird mixture that happens in a religious music context of this sort of like spiritual significance download thing that happens, where you have art that is supposedly of some sort of a sacred nature, and it's more difficult to approach it from a critical angle. So this guy from stage said, "You feel like God gave you that song?" And he said, "Yeah, God gave me the song." And brother from stage said, "Perhaps you ought to consider that God gave you that song so you could fix it." Which is great answer.
That's so good.
It's so good. You are doing that for folks, but it takes sort of this detachment. Like something can be, there's this myth there's this mythos that if you're doing something foreign in a church context, foreign in a religious context, there's this like weird, mysterious, like untouchable thing that happens. Like this, it becomes more special, and therefore the quality tends to come down a little bit because we don't put the critical work into it. Is that your experience? Am I ringing bells here for you?
I've definitely seen that. I've seen that happen. I think here again, it's so much about it is like when I talk about the Christian music industry as a whole, I can kind of roll my eyes at it. When I talk about my experience in it, I can be both super cynical and amazingly, amazingly impressed. And my particular community has been people who I think are making some of the best art in the world. I know some of the best musicians in the world, some of the best engineers, some of the best songwriters in the world. And some of them fly very far under the radar in this particular industry. And then other people have kind of learned to chameleon themselves a little bit and like, no, I can, in the words of one of my mentors, I've learned to put a vitamin in a Twinkie. And so there's that element of it. But I think, maybe it's just, I've been taught by people well, who have guided people through that process, like that interchange that you experienced. And, I usually tell people when I start working with them, it's like, hey, there will be a point when you hate me because I'm going to take something that you love, whether you think it's from the Lord or not. Like I'm going to take something that you love and I'm going to tell you it's not good. And you don't have to be to agree with me. And I might be wrong, but if you want to work with me, know that that's going to happen. And some people have been angry and they disappear. But like the artists that I like to work with have usually leaned into that process, and because they're smart, just like a good chef. It's like, yeah, well, the Lord may have caused everything you have on your table to grow, but that doesn't mean that it's a pasta, you have to cook it and cut it and know how to do that and know how all their tools work. And
yeah, that's what makes it culture. That's what makes it art, is your actual participation.
Right. But even like, God gave me my wife and got my kids, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect the way, those relationships are perfect the way they are. It's like,
you got to put the work
that stuff takes work.
Yeah.
And the truth is like, if we believe in redemption and resurrection, it's like, then what are we saved from? What are we freed for? It's like, we are free so that we can do the work of fixing our relationships, fearlessly creating, fearlessly loving. Those are the things that we actually are allowed to do because of the belief that we have. which lets us be as creative as possible, right? Because my identity isn't determined by the thing that I create or by its sales. And guess what? I can make the weirdest, wildest thing that might end up being beautiful. It might end up being crazy, because there's a freedom there. So I think, I think I've seen stuff that was so safe and for the masses and blah, 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 and that's never been interesting to me. But I've been around a lot of super, super creative believers who I think do their best work because of that freedom they found in their faith.
Do you buy the idea of sacred music? Like the delineation that there's music that is sacred music, and if not, like how, or maybe more. Do you buy the idea of sacred music, and what would you mean if you used the phrase?
I believe that music is a language, right? And so, in a language, you write poetry, and you also write manuals for your dishwasher. And so I think there are different uses for the kinds of things that people create. And I think a lot of those can be valid. I think that there are places, particularly like in worship music, where, hey, these are songs that are written specifically for a group of people to gather together, to sing, to remind themselves and to teach themselves what they believe, to look over and see that their neighbor believes the same thing, and that they share a struggle and they share a hope. And so I think that kind of music is very specific. Whether you want to call it sacred music or worship music or Christian music, it's never going to work on top 40 radio or in the club or karaoke. But it is going to work in the place where it's meant. I think the catch is when you try to take something that's great and then make a watered down Christian version of it. And that's where people get angry and get cynical. And that's the world that I think I started out in, and that I just was able to kind of get a lifeline out of pretty quickly. Like, I didn't want to be the Christian version of Radiohead. I think there is something about people like to listen to music that speaks to what they know and believe, love songs. You don't listen to happy love songs when somebody just dumped you, right? Like,
not unless you hate yourself and you're just trying to
right?
dig a little bit deeper into that sadness.
Yeah. But it's like, you get dumped, man. You listen to Bon Iver, and right, like, you get sad. You go for it. And so I think, there's music created for different environments and different seasons of life. And so I don't know. I think you just have to be. I think if you're in a place where you're making what is on your heart, what is true to you, and you've done the work to know who you are, then if I want to sit down with you and talk for an hour, we're going to talk about God, then your record should talk about God. If we're going to sit for an hour and talk and that's not going to come up, then you probably don't need to put that on your record.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I had an interesting experience too, and this was very shaping for me. I played guitar for a guy named Stephen Curtis Chapman for a couple of years. And I was raised like listening to him when I was in high school, middle school and a little bit of high school. And then I hadn't heard his music for 20 years. I might think that the music's a little cheesy, but, and I can say this because I said it to him. Mm-hmm. But I had some good friends on the tour, and, it's a great gig. So I went and played with him, and I realized that, like, his communication, like, he as a person uses language that I might find a little cheesy. He's a different age. He's in a different sort of culture. And, like, he'll say things like, hey, he'll text, like, before a show, like, settle up, boys, we're hitting the trail tonight or whatever. And you're like, wow, he really thinks this way. This is like who he is.
That's actually him.
So when you're standing on stage and you're singing, settle up your horses, you're like, you know what? This guy means this to the core of his being. I will take a bullet for this. Like, he is being true to himself. And it's in a different vernacular than me and my, like, artsy Beekner friends. And you know what? That's great. And that was really shaping for me.
The summer breeze raced down the hall. It felt so good that I forgot the dogwood tree. I miss that
again, coming back to story and whose story am I telling? And ultimately, part of what you're getting at, even with the Stephen Curtis Chapman moment there, is, the best you can do is to tell your own story really well. That's kind of the goal. It's what you're doing with your artists in A&R. It's like, how do you find your story and do that really, really well? The broad American cultural moment that you and I find ourselves in is moving, at least in central focus and conversation, is moving away from whiteness, moving away from sort of straight white male Christian centric storytelling. That a lot of what a lot of what is interesting, a lot of what I would go so far as to say is important and is urgent now, is not straight, not white, not male, and not Christian. Do you, as a creator who is a straight white male Christian, do you have a sense of, like, have you felt that shift for your work, for your creativity? Have you felt like are you navigating that? Like, what? Tell me about the last 3 to 4 years or so, maybe even more so since the 2016 election. What's it look like for you to be an artist who is a straight white male Christian, to make art or to want to make art or help make art for this time in history?
Yeah, man, I think about that all day, every day. That is a burning thing on my heart. I spend a lot of time looking actually at the demographics of the church. I'm really fascinated by this. Mm-hmm. And the church in America is shrinking among white males, as white males are shrinking in proportion to the culture. Still, white males being Christian is shrinking within its shrinking demographic. Mm-hmm. But the church in America is growing, and it's growing among women. It's growing primarily among Asian women and Hispanic women and African American women. And when you look at Christian radio or most big conferences, you see a bunch of guys that look like me. Yeah. And that's not great. That's not great. When you look at the worship songs sung around the world now, because so many people look to America for influence, over 70% of the songs that are sung by the church are written by 20 white guys that live here in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah. And that's not good. That's not good for the church. That's not good for those 20 white guys. Mm-hmm. And I love some of those guys, and that's not good for them. And
pause there for a second, because that's something that's like that's an interesting thing to say, and I can that. But what do you mean by that's not good for those 20 white guys? Because that's part of the way that story comes across for folks who are none of these things, straight white male Christian. Yeah. That it is that way because it is good for those guys. That's why it became that way. It's good for those guys. Yeah. So what do you say? What are you saying when it's not good for those guys? What's that mean?
Well, I know that when you have a house that's so big that you can't have friends anymore, that's not good for you, right? I know how hard it is to be friends with some of these guys because I can't hang out with them and not deal with envy. And I know that I'm not the only person in their circle, right? I know the weight that's put on them. I know the sort of the isolation, and I just see like, yeah, you know what, you would be better. You'd be better off if you made less money. And that's not, that probably sounds real judgy.
Not necessarily. It sounds more prophetic than it sounds judgy.
And I say that out of like deep care for some of those people who've been very, very kind to me. And I just go, you know what? I don't think it's good for any of us to speak for everyone. You know, and I'm not knocking them. It's like, nobody set out with, nobody had an ulterior motive to make millions in worship music. It's like, they're literally like all these guys started writing songs at their churches and people started singing them because they're really gifted at it. And you can't knock that, right? No. It's not their fault.
That's just how the marketplace works.
It's like, it's just how that works. But there are all these cultural implications of, well, you're in a position where you can do this because you da-da-da-da and you da-da-da-da and, and it's like any other, most of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, their parents were rich, right? Because they could afford to go to the good schools and right? So all of this stuff is systemic. And so the key is when you're those 20 white guys, how do you look around and go, how do I help? Right? And that's the key. And to be fair, I'm probably in that category, right? I'm an executive at a record company in Christian music.
Right.
So
how do you help?
My job is, okay, well, don't only sign white guys, right? So far I haven't signed any, but I've signed African-American women and white women, and trying to sign, like working with Catholic artists in the Protestant world, trying to do things that are not a white guy with an acoustic guitar. Say this as a white guy with an acoustic guitar who loves all of his best friends who are white guys with acoustic guitars.
Right.
So, that's been a thing for me, is how do I just look for other voices and go, okay, so I'm sitting here with some resources and some amount of gifting. How do I use this to serve a little bit? Like, I can't fix the system, but like, can I fight for a few people's voices to get heard? Right. And over 20 years of me in this role, can I sit and have conversations with people where they hear me pushing and they see the things, the beauty that other people bring in, and they go, yeah, I'm more open to that too. I need to do that too, and I've had people that have poured into me, and I'm the fruit of that. And that's why I even think this way. And so, I think for us in this position, it's really our responsibility to go, okay, we're here. How do we make the best of it? How can we leave this place more beautiful and more diverse and, open and more welcoming and more truthful to the kingdom of God than it was when I got here. And that's the goal. And I won't do it perfectly. And but yeah, that's kind of the big picture goal. I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. Well, and specifically the place and posture that you get to live in to answer that question is going to be somewhat unique in that cultural space, because a lot of what ends up happening, the music is this place, is this way in which, by which and to which we are gathered and in which we gather. And part of why white evangelical America gathers as white as it is because the culture has been dominated by like white male artistic expression. And part of what you're saying is, yes, that's been the case. And here are people here are people who look like you and I, who have the opportunity then, if we have that power, to wield that now differently. If you become conscious of that now, then what do you do from where you are in order to make tomorrow better? Because maybe you didn't see it. Maybe you didn't see it coming. Maybe you didn't care. Maybe you did and it wasn't that big a deal. But now if you do and you're in this position, how do you actually take the power and the privilege, the wealth that you have now of resources and otherwise, and actually build into tomorrow so that it doesn't look as much like you, as opposed to, I can continue to do this and just keep making music and art that's going to draw in this crowd and going to continue to isolate others. I love that answer because it doesn't just come from like, here's a neat idea. You're actually in an executive boardroom. You're actually in an office in which you get to say, here is a non-white, non-male voice that I want to give a place and a position of power to. That actually does make a difference tomorrow. I love that.
Well, thank you. And I should say too, like, I'm employed right now by a company that believes in this, and that's why I took the job, and that's why they offered it. It's like, we sat down, we talked about it, and it's like, there's a whole company of people that are revved up about this.
Last little round here, I'd love to give you a chance to talk about the pivot, about the podcast. This is maybe your newest artistic, like long-term artistic expression, is actually doing the pivot as a podcast. One, can you talk about the podcast, what it is and what you're doing with it, and like how did it actually come up? Yeah,
well, it's kind of the podcast in my last record sort of came about at the same time for the same reason. There were two different ways of sort of having the same conversation. I'm a Midwestern kid. I always have like 5 jobs. And when I was 35, I took this record company job. I was like, oh, it's fine. I've finally done it. Whatever. I'm going to retire here. I love this and whatever. And then 2 years later, they were like, yeah, you don't work here anymore. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't land on my feet. And I had 3 kids and a mortgage and panic attacks. And
like legit panic attacks.
I didn't know what to do. Yeah, I didn't know what to do. And basically everybody hits this spot in their mid to late 30s where you go, okay, I've now worked as long as I haven't. On paper, I'm halfway done with my life. Is this what I want? And everybody I know is asking those same questions. And is once you lose a job, people all of a sudden come out and want to talk about what's, they have stuff that they want to talk about that now you're a safe place. Cause like, for whatever reason, and sort of like you show up at your 12-step meeting and all of a sudden you go like, oh, we can talk about this now too. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
There's kind of like this shared suffering opens a door for like
right?
for actual
you're
conversation.
You're not going to judge me for this, right?
Right. Yeah.
You're a safe place.
Yeah.
And so I'm having all these kind of amazing conversations. No, none of them are paying me, but I'm sure enjoying the conversation. So I just kind of had this thought, like, I love podcasts and I've got this recording gear and I have nowhere to use it. And what if we can't be the only people that talk about this stuff, but maybe because we're
right.
we're artists, like we're more open to talking about it. Yeah. What if I just record some of these and share them for people? And so I did that, and it kind of immediately took off. People loved it, and the response was kind of overwhelming and immediate. The Me Too of it. Just, I thought I was the only person. It was amazing to hear. Oh, I've been wanting to quit my job. I finally you gave me the guts to. Or to go start this, or to go say this to my wife, or whatever. Like, it's been a real treat. So it's been about a year and a half that I've been doing it, and I just couldn't love it more. So
it's a really, really interesting podcast. All those conversations are very
Thank
unique.
you.
I mean, once again, place and posture, geographic, cultural, that you get to sit in and ask questions. It is a really unique expression. The podcast and the new record parallel and come out of the same place. With the podcast, you're asking questions of others. There's a sort of the question and answer thing that happens with the record as well. To some degree, it's a little bit of which a lot of your songwriting ends up being. It's not like just narrative. There's a bit of a conversation in it. Can you talk about? Like how are you doing? Like how does the record approach that pivot moment for you?
Yeah, well, the record's called The Painted Desert, and it kind of the idea is just when you have these days or that season where like you're used to walk into the room and like you flip the light switch and it always turns on, and one day you walk in and it just doesn't turn on, and eventually you have to realize that you got to do some work because some stuff is broken. And so the record is kind of, the podcast is me sitting and not talking as much as possible, which has been a good thing for me to learn and practice. Is just to ask people questions and then shut up. And I've learned a lot from that. The record is me sort of processing like, well, God, these are my expectations, and my expectations are not met and probably won't be. Why? And what am I supposed to do instead? And so kind of a lot of wrestling with scripture in that, but then also holding on to a lot of scripture. You lead me beside still waters. Okay, well then I'm going to go to the lake every day and walk around because you said you were going to be there. So I'm just going to go there and wait for you. Yeah. Which was a very tangible thing. And so I wrote a song called Still Waters while walking around the lake. Right. And then a verse in the book of Joel says he will redeem the years the locusts have eaten. Well, okay, let's talk about those years, and let's believe that he's going to redeem that. And so the record's kind of a very chill, moody, Sufjan Stevens-y,
yes, it is,
vibey, just look at what is it like to be in that season? So I think some people might listen to it and think, oh, it's kind of sad. But to me, it's very hopeful because it was a lot of healing was done by the process of making it.
It's actually really, I don't want to call it an easy listen because it's not easy listening, but when you chill is probably the word. Like there's a great energy through the whole record, but it does have that. Sufjan's a pretty good parallel, but like there's this sort of this. It's a piece. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. There's this energy that holds the record together, and there's a piece that runs all the way through it, which is really fascinating to hear. Yeah, no, you don't want that. But there's a piece that runs all the way through, which is fascinating insofar as it comes from a place of needing that piece. Like you were in a transition, sort of in that not exactly hitting the ground moment, but like you said, not landing on your feet for the first time, and that these are the songs that came out of it. I love that. That actually reframes the way I hear it as well.
Oh wow, well thanks. And that idea of the painted desert. I was reading a lot of Westerns that year, but also like that's a place where nothing grows, but it's beautiful, and some good comes out of a tough season. It's kind of the idea. So.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. You're very welcome. Well, Andrew, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Hey, I got to tell you, and if you're still rolling, then use this. You need to know, like, your prayer book is amazing, and I have used it a lot. I've been really, really thankful for it. Both your writings and is it Scott? Is that his name? The artist?
Yeah.
Dude, the things that he. Every one of those images, you look at it, and at first you think you know what it is, but then you look closer, and it's something different.
Yeah.
And it's the same with what you write. It's one of the. It's shocking how much you got out of so little line drawings
that
and
was
like
the hope.
12 words a page. Like, it's profound, and I hope a lot of people find it, and I think a lot of people are going to find it really useful and beautiful. So,
dude,
if you can throw that in the podcast, do it.
I will. I'll try to figure out a way to do that.
I think it's great, man. I've been really thankful for it. I read it most days.
That's really, really cool. I definitely appreciate that. And I appreciate you paying attention to and listening to this episode of the At Sea Podcast. You can follow up with Andrew Osenga and look into any of the wonderful things he's up to as an artist, as a musician, a podcaster. The podcast is called The Pivot. His most recent project, called The Painted Desert, is available at Spotify and iTunes, kind of anywhere. And it's really, really good. Do yourself a favor and go check it out. You can find me at justinmcroberts.com, and if you are interested in joining this team and supporting the work of this podcast, you can head over to patreon.com. Search my name, Justin McRoberts. We'd love to have you on the team. Until next time.